name's Stone. I'm with Aerzen. I will be your primary local rep, even though I'm from Huntsville, Alabama. I do spend a good bit of time down in Florida. What we're going to do today is a basic training for the new Aerzen blower packages. There are two different sizes. The primary differences between the two sizes is one is big, one is small. As far as layout, general arrangement, what each unit has, they're all the same, just in a different size. So we're going to use one of the larger blowers when we go out there as the example to show you what items are, how to do the belt changes, the air filter, and that stuff, because it's a lot easier for more people to see over the little cabinets that are yay tall that you're kind of reaching in to do the service. Go ahead and go to the next one. Like I was saying, we're going to do the basic function, the general arrangement, where you can get parts and service, what are your checks, daily, weekly, monthly, semi-annually, and yearly. In all of this, I will be constantly referring back to the manual, because in our manual we have a maintenance section that if you forget any of the items I tell you as far as the maintenance goes, we have a thorough description, how to, time intervals, and what has to take place for each item. Also in the manual there will be a section on the electronic control. For the electronic controls on the machines, their primary function is going to be to communicate with SCADA, relay fault messages, or if there is a fault with the blower, it'll tell SCADA, and SCADA shuts the blower down. To reset those items, you will have to go to the blower to physically reset it, which is a standard practice, so that way if you have a fault, if there's something going on, i.e. An overheating issue, if there's something else that caused that gives you a chance to check the blower over, make sure everything's good before you start it back up. You reset your maintenance counters at the HMI, the control on the unit. Your starting and stopping will be taking place for local at the VFD, remote or auto will be from SCADA. So go ahead and go to the next one. These are positive displacement blowers, which means what they take in, they will be putting out. You have your air filter, your stage, your motor, your silencer, your belt drive. These do have pressure switches that are attached to the HMI installed in the cabinets or in the control cabinets on the back of the larger ones. Go ahead and go to the next one. This is a basic picture of what the stage looks like. This would be the input end. This is your intake. This is your discharge. On the back side, you have your gear set. On this front side, there is a oil slinger on the end of this shaft. On the back, on the driven end, there's an oil slinger on the back of this shaft. All the blowers have been leveled. All the alignments have been checked and verified. Now, to check your oil levels, there are two places to do it. There is an indicator on the front of the cabinet that I'll show y'all where that is, and there's also sight glasses on each stage. Now, where the sight glasses are is on each corner of the stage. So if you're wanting to verify level, you can take and use the sight glasses, and on the back side you can take your phone and take a selfie of it to get a picture of it. That should be checked once a year. Go to the next slide. All right, as you're looking at the stage, this is what the inside of the tri-lobe blower looks like. It pulls the air in, your rotors rotate to the outer direction, pull the air down and push it out. Now, there is some noise that takes place from that process of basically the rotors coming together and compressing the air slightly as it moves it through. Your back pressure is set by whatever your tank level and density of your liquid in your tank is. So for the large blowers, I believe the maximum pressure is right around 8, and for the small blowers it's 6. So if you're running higher than those, there could be an issue with your, you could have a valve closed, you could have something going on with the system that is causing that pressure to increase. Because in our blowers, if you were to just turn the blower on to an open pipe, it'll never build pressure. It just moves air. What creates the pressure on the unit is whatever's in the system that is operating in the system. Go ahead and go to the next one. Next. All right. Now, for starting and stopping units locally, there is a HOA switch or local off switch at the local disconnects on the by the blowers. I'll show y'all where those are. There's a actual HOA switch on the front of the drives that is for hand, off, and auto or remote. I don't remember what the ID tag says. So for the blowers to run, the control on the blower will always be in remote. The switch at the local disconnects will have to be in remote, because it's always receiving a start and stop command from either SCADA or via the VFD or from the VFD itself. Your local disconnects only will stop the motor from running. It does not turn off the control power, nor does it turn off the VFD. So if you're, for your local lockout, whatever your policy is, be it lockout the main feeding the VFDs or the VFDs or the local disconnects, whatever that process is. So if your local disconnect is off, that motor will never run, because the drive could start, but the power will never get to the motor. Let's go to the next one. Now here's a very important one. If you ever have to replace the motor, replace the drive, or anything electrically that can affect the rotation of the motor, you need to pull the belts off and verify motor rotation before you put it back in operation. Because if you run the blower backwards, it will damage and or destroy it. Because on those slingers that I discussed, they're a round disc and they have a notch that's designed to turn the one way to pick the oil up and sling it throughout the housing. If you turn it backwards, then it's not getting lubricated. You're pulling against the check valve in the blower, and bad things can happen. So you always want to make sure that it's turning in the right direction, and I'll show y'all physically on the machine where it gives you the arrow and which way it turns. Go ahead and go to the next one. Next. All right, here it goes into some of the maintenance item. General inspection, we recommend that it's done by us, but as long as you follow the instructions in the manual, it describes what each maintenance item covers, what you're supposed to look at, and what you're supposed to check on those items. Recommend that at 20,000 hours. For general maintenance, you should be checking your oil, at a minimum checking your oil level once a week. Opening the back cover and taking a quick peek inside the unit to make sure you don't have any leaks or things like that happening. That's something else you should do at least monthly, because if you don't at least look at the equipment, you could have a leak going on and it may take a couple of months for it to visibly show up on the outside of the machine. So we should always do those, at least those two items, at least once a month. The oil change is done with the oil that's in it. It's a 16,000 hour or 2-year oil. Now there and again, my boss had a phone call from a customer that had an issue with a blower this week that said, well, you said the oil was a 16,000 hour oil. They never bothered to look inside the cabinet and they had a leak. The blower's locked up now. So that's why we stress you need to at least look at the machines. Your air filter is check every 6 months, change as needed at that point. It is changed once a year as a standard. Your belts are changed once a year and also inspected when you do the air filter inspection. Now, even if the blower doesn't run that many hours during the period of that year, those belts have still been supporting the weight of that motor, so they need to be changed. They've had that stress on them the entire time. Your swing check valve on the blower It is in the back at the discharge. That should be checked at least every 16,000 hours or 2 years, because that basically hangs from the plate, and I'll show y'all where it's located at on the machine. As the blower runs, it lifts. When it stops, it closes. So on all of the systems, you have at least one primary and one alternate. So if one's running, the other one's not, there's air pressure on that system, and it pushes against that check valve, and that check valve prevents it from turning it backwards. And backwards is not something we want to happen. All right, go ahead and go to the next one. All right, here's a very important one. As I described, you have your sight glasses. This is what they look like. You have the overall sight glass, you have a little red circle and a little red dot in the middle of it. Right now I have all the sight glasses at touching on one side or the other of that dot. That is your optimal oil level. You do not want to go below that, and you don't want to go above that, because especially on the front, because these are sling lubricated, they have lip seals that are not submersion seals. So if you were to overfill the unit, and at the front where that input shaft comes in, and that oil is constantly in contact with that shaft, what will happen is it'll start migrating across that shaft. It will create a leak, and it will damage that seal and cause premature seal failure. So these are where you want that to show on the sight glass. On the front label, it has a similar reference point. It's just lines going across the sight glass, but they represent the same thing. Next. Okay, that's the air filter. That's not a very good picture of it. I will show y'all how the air filter is opened up, how you take it out, and how you put it back in. Go ahead and go to the next one. Okay, this is not real clear, but this is what your maintenance schedule in the book shows. Up at the top, it shows you the interval. Over here, it shows you what it is, and the dots represent when it's supposed to be checked. Go to the next one. All right, if you do have malfunctions, I touched on it a little bit. If you have a high pressure malfunction, that is going to be primarily something in the system has changed. Verify your valves, make sure there's nothing blocking the discharge lines for that blower. If you have a high motor temp, for that one, you'll want to take a look at your motor, make sure the attached fan on the back is still present and isn't damaged. You want to make sure there's no airflow restrictions on the cabinet, because if the cabinet can't get the air in, then yes, it's gonna run hotter than it should. For noise, that could be oil or bearing. If you've ran it low on oil, damaged the bearing, then that could lead to that. If you have, we'll say you're running a high intake pressure on your inlet filter, well, either your filter's clogged or there's something restricting the intake of the blower. If there's an electrical issue, i.e. we'll say that the drive, you get a VFD failure, and on the display it tells you that there was a voltage loss or something along those lines, you're going to also have that same potential alarm on the blower. Now, that's not a guarantee, because the control power and the main power are separate items, and the drive does not directly communicate with the Aerzen control. So the VFD fault will not show up on the blower control panel. It only shows up on the front of the VFD and on SCADA. All right, go ahead and go to the next one. Vibrations, bearing failure, an issue with the discharge causing high back pressure, that can cause it. You can't, being these are on VFDs, they do have the what we call the Aegis rings, which helps reduce the electrical noise and gives the voltage a place to discharge without damaging the bearing, or to minimize that issue. But if you hear like a wah 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 type noise, that's harmonics. If it gets to a point to where it's very loud, or it actually starts getting where there's a mechanical noise, then you may have a damaged motor bearing. There's Filters you can put in. These were purchased with the appropriate equipment to run on VFDs, and we don't normally have issues, but I mean, they're mechanical equipment, so things can happen. For spare parts, I'll show you on the ID tags where we have an email address and we have a phone number that will get you in touch with a person to either schedule service and repair, order parts, or order parts and schedule a service. Warranty. The blower packages found in the section, unless it's otherwise stated in the submittal. I believe it's 1 year on the package, if I remember correctly. I'm surprised it doesn't say there. But if there's anything outside of the standard, it's listed in the submittal. Next. All right, here's your, this is what we're going to look at when we go outside. The sound enclosures. These have the electronic controls, so I'll show you where you find the inlet pressure, discharge temperature. We're going to look at all the components inside the unit and how we go about changing the filters, the belts, and the oil, because that's your three primary maintenance items on there. And I'll show you where the other items are located physically on the blower. Next. I'll show you where the junction box in the back of the blower is, where all the control wiring enters and leaves the machine. Yep, we already covered that. So next, I think that's probably it. Okay. All right, so at that point, are there any basic questions as far as where you can find the maintenance information, how to do what it is, etc.? Because the manuals are out there at the blowers. Josh is going to be collecting all those accessory parts up and turning those over to y'all. There's a wrench for each blower. There should be keys for the cabinet doors. There should have been at least one for each blower, Josh. So you may want to check and make sure that those are there. If not, we can get you more. There's a manual for each one. I think that pretty much covers what we're going to do in here.
The manuals do indicate the intervals, how often?
Yes, that page that I showed you where it has a list on the one side and then across the top with the dots, it's a chart that tells you what should take place when, and then in that, as you go into that section, it fully describes what you do for that particular item, be it as just as simple as checking the oil, or changing the belts, changing the filter, whatever the case is. So, and one thing I will definitely give Aerzen is they do have a very descriptive information under each maintenance item. They walk you through how to do it correctly. So that's a big plus.
Type of oil is on there also?
Type of oil is listed on the front of the unit as well. It's called Delta Lube 06. Like I said, it's a 2-year, 16,000 hour oil. Now, some equipment has break-in periods where you would change the oil at the end of that break-in period. For the Delta Lube, it's 16,000 hours from startup. So there is no required oil change at a certain period. Now, there is a 500-hour maintenance counter that pops up. All that is for is you just need to open up the blower, make sure that there's no loose fasteners, the belts still look good, and there's no visible leaks inside the machine. You're just giving it a good overall look at to make sure that everything's still running okay and that there's no issues.
What's the country of origin?
The primary components are built in Germany. These I don't think have any additional outside components, but the packages the main components came from Germany. The large ones came assembled, the smaller ones were assembled in Coatesville. We get all the individual components are shipped in and then we assemble those. But they're a very dependable machine. They're easy to maintain and they'll give you a lot of service life. All you have to do is take care of them as you would any piece of equipment. Anything else in here? If not, we'll... Yes, sir.
Quick question about the bearing. You mentioned briefly about the electrical
noise, creating it's the fluting. In the early days of VFDs, before they realized that, because what you're doing with a VFD is you're taking AC power, turning it into DC power, and then turning it back into AC power, pulsating that energy or that electricity to make the motor speed up and slow down. So what was happening was it was creating a static field that was actually fluting the bearing balls themselves or rollers as well as the races, and that was causing premature bearing failure. So what the Aegis rings do is it gives that static energy a place to dissipate. So it doesn't go directly for that bearing. Instead, it gets dissipated through the shaft and just becomes nil. It also helps somewhat with the electrical noise. And then in your drives, I believe these have the ferrite rings that are also filters for the noise. So we've had really good luck with the Aegis rings stopping that premature bearing failure. Now, nowadays you have ceramic bearings, there's other different types of bearings that are specifically designed for VFDs. These do have VFD rated bearings, so that has already been taken into account.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, I mean, you hear that.
Oh, that harmonics, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I will admit, for our blowers, where I tend to hear that, and it varies from machine to machine because no two castings are exactly the same. But I typically tend to hear it between about 49 and about 52 hertz. That's where I hear it. Now, the severity of it, there and again, it depends on the equipment itself and what the natural harmonics of that equipment is, because every machine has its own natural harmonics. Ours seems to run within that range, and in most cases, it's not an issue. I have had, for whatever reason, due to the incoming power or the natural harmonics of the unit itself, where there was a particular hertz, maybe a 1 to 2 hertz range that they tried to stay away from. So if you find that you do have a spot on these, which is unlikely because the PD blowers like these, they typically don't tend to do it anywhere near what a compressor or a hybrid does. So I don't expect you may notice a little bit, but it shouldn't be an issue. All right. So this is the larger of the blowers. There's, for the first system, there's 2. For the second system, there's 3. And for the last system, there's the 2 small ones. Now, as you look at the front of the package, you have one cover that covers the air intake section. You have another cover that covers the fan and the air direction section. And then you have access to the motor and the belt drive. You also have your electronic controls. Right now this is in sleep mode. So if you touch it, it comes back up. Now, if it's bright sunlight, I don't know if there's a partition that's going to be put up here that helps block sun or not. An option, we do have sun guards, so if the sun is going to hit directly on this side of the blower, that's an option that may want to be considered for these. You have the e-stop, which is part of the fault circuit for the blowers. Right now, as a temporary until SCADA is up and operational, there will be a fault connection between the blowers and the drives, so if there is a fault, it will shut it down. In that scenario, you'll have to come out here. I'll create a fault so it can be seen. By hitting the e-stop, that created a fault. Now with an active fault, this flash is red. Now there's a button up here in the top left corner. If I hit that, it takes me to the fault screen. That'll tell me what the fault is, so I know what I need to look at. To acknowledge it, well, if you also notice, the little red block, just like the screen, is blinking. If I acknowledge it, but the fault is still present, it just goes solid. So if I exit out of that, now instead of blinking, it's just solid. Now I believe it's after 5 minutes. For a service indicator, it will go back to flashing until that service has been done and you've acknowledged that maintenance interval. But a fault, it'll stay red until that fault's cleared. Now if I pull this e-stop out, there's no more fault, it went back to a normal screen. So until that fault is actually cleared, you will not be able to put the blower back into operation. That screen will stay red, the fault circuit's still active. Hence, once even with the temporary alarm, that will prevent it from the blower from restarting. Now once SCADA goes into effect, it's going to be the same thing because it's picking up that same general fault and relaying that to the drive. Within the screen, the very first tab is your pressure screen, and there are 2 items on it. One is your discharge pressure, which is up now. If you hit the scroll button, it takes you to the intake pressure, which is being picked up from that blue line on the back and sent to the pressure transducer in the back of the cabinet. The next tab is your temperature. There's only one. Down on the front of the silencer that is directly behind that panel, you have your temperature probe is installed in there. If you ever have an issue with it, that's where you would change it out at.
So what's normal running?
For these, you're probably during the hottest part of the summer, ballparking it based upon what the pressure is, set point is. I'm going to say you're probably going to be at or about 200 degrees in that ballpark. It may be cooler. Like this time of year, you're definitely probably going to be cooler. I'll know more today once I actually do the run testing. Because when I first start them up and do the run testing, I'm going to be running them at max speed, max pressure. So that'll tell me what should be a typical average for this time of year. Now I can't tell you the hot weather one just because it's not hot. And as your ambient temperature increases and decreases, you will see that temperature fluctuate a little bit. So you only have one temperature just for the discharge. The third tab, being there's no speed control, has no function. And the wrench tab, which is the most important, is the last one. Now the first screen that pops up is your service counters. Those count down from maximum to 0. Once it gets within 25 hours, it will go into a warning. Now the warning will not be a shutdown, it will just stay yellow until that is accomplished and it is reset. Once it's reset, it goes away and goes back to the full count. The next page of that is your operating hours. Your next page is your login screen. Now, as a customer, all you have to do is hit the user. It'll pop up your number pad. The password for the user is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's just the top row of numbers. So you hit that, 2, 3, 4, 5, enter. It takes you into the main menu screen. From here, there's 2 primary screens that you'll want. One may be the limit values. The other one is service. Service is always the most important. That's where you go to reset your service counters. If somebody has acknowledged and cleared a fault, that's where you go to see what that fault was. So that way, if you call us for troubleshooting help, we may direct you to that screen to tell us what that code was and that description.
Has a history?
Yes, that's what we're getting ready to look at right now. Under that tab, you have maintenance intervals, machine data, fault registry, and acknowledged maintenance. The maintenance intervals, fault registry, and acknowledged maintenance, that's the 3 buttons that you'll use on this screen. Now, as the maintenance counters reach the warning level, they turn yellow. So if I go into acknowledge maintenance, it gives me a series of buttons. There's 8 buttons because there's eight serviceable items on the machine. So that individual button will turn yellow. So when you do complete the service, you'll not only reset that, but any other item that you service within that list, you also want to reset that as well, or you'll get a premature service counter or service alert. And to get out of the screen or to scroll up and down to the different menu items, you just hit the up or down button. The X is out. Fault registry. I don't think it's infinite, but there is a long list. You will probably never fill up this fault registry list. That's how much data it can record. As you're looking at the screen, there will be 2 items for each alarm. One points to the left or the right, and one points to the left. One is the snapshot it took when it shut down. The other is the snapshot it took once the machine came to a stop and the run command was removed. So that's your 2 items. So for the one, when the fault happened, that's the important one that you will always want to reference, because it'll tell you what the temperature was, what the pressure was, and all the other pertinent data that's displayed available on this machine under that alarm. So if I go into, we'll go to the very first one. You hit the red or the fault button, the arrow. That is the alarm after it shut down. The one to the right, it would be should be the snapshot of when it happened. So that's the one that will give you the pressure and temperature of the blower when that fault happened, as well as it tells you up here at the top what that fault was. Any questions on that part? So to get to it, we log in. We go to the main menu, we go under service and to fault registry, and that brings up our information. The maintenance intervals, this tells you what those counters should be set at. If there's a 0 there, then that doesn't apply to this machine. It doesn't exist on this particular machine. Only the ones with numbers, which would be 2,000, 4,000, 8,000, 16,000. That's your counters. Now, under the user, it is not. You can't go in and change it. You can only look at what it's supposed to be. The other button that you may have to use if we'll say that this control goes bad, we send you a pre-programmed one and instructions on how to change it. Well, when you get it over here where the start and stop buttons are, right now they have little locks on them. That means that they are there to give the indication, but they're non-functional. So if you get that new control, that may not be the case. You may have to actually go into the control system and go under the miscellaneous to actually set it up for, and we would walk you through doing that over the phone. So you would go into it. The third one down is remote on off. You change that to digital because it's receiving a signal from the drive. All right.
I got a question about,
yes.
Do you guys make a cover for this?
Yes, that's what I was describing. It's they call it a weather cover. It basically, this pops off. There's a cord back here in the back that has 2 screws that holds it in place. It's a serial plug. To install the cover, you would, these actually have the screws on them. So you would take these screws out, install the cover underneath these pieces, put your screws back in, tighten it down, and then you would just pop that back in place and it folds down over the top of it.
Right.
So it prevents accidental impact damage as well as UV damage.
Yeah, because I'm thinking the sun's going to come up and at least...
It shouldn't get much sun. It shouldn't get much. Rising over there.
Well, the one thing I'll say is if you start noticing that this plastic surface cover starts getting like a white tint to it, you may want to think about getting the covers. They come as a kit with instructions to install, but basically you just pop this off. Be careful when you pop it off. So that way it doesn't damage this connector back here. Install your cover. Now the one thing I will say, if you ever have to replace this or you get those covers, this plug, do not disconnect it with control power on, because what will likely happen is the 24 volts that powers this will short across pins and you'll kill it. So turn control power off when you mess with this. Any other questions on this right here? I mean, the book gives, it will walk you through every menu, how to get to it, what it is, what it includes. All right, so the next item that we're going to cover, over here you have your attached fan. This is attached to the end of the input shaft. It pulls air in here. It goes to the back of the cabinet. There's an attached fan on the back of the motor. So what it does is both of those pull air toward the front of the enclosure. This fan pushes it out here. It goes down and it exits the back of the machine. It does that for two reasons. Number one, so this way you're always pulling in cooler air than you're exhausting out. Because if you ever reach a point where you start running a higher temperature than what you were, you may want to make sure that your exhaust back there at the back is not clogged by rats building a nest under there, raccoons, that type of thing, because you can't restrict. You could put a screen up to prevent rodents from getting in there, but you'd have to make sure you cleaned it. That would add an additional service item you would have to look at. So when you're doing your checks once a year, you definitely want to look up underneath there and make sure there's nothing there. That's how your airflow works. Now, as you look at the machine right now, I haven't tightened these belts up. I just have them sitting on. What you use to raise it up is this universal lifting device over here. There's a wrench right up there, if you will hand me that.
Gear wrench?
Yep. So basically a ratchet wrench, it gives you an indicator of which way you're turning. So to raise it up, you want to loosen, and to lower it, you would tighten. So basically what you're doing is this black piece right here, you're raising it up to raise the motor, you're lowering it down to allow the motor to take the tension. So once you've raised guard off, that allows you access around the fan. So you raise it up high enough to get your belts off. You roll them off. You come over here. You take them out. Take your old ones out. You put your new ones in just like you took these out. Make sure when you put them in, you line them up on the grooves for the pulley. And then once you do that, you put them back on. Now, the one thing I can't stress enough, when you roll the belts off and on, you notice I had just a bare slight bit of tension on the first belt. Do not let the belts take all the motor weight rolling them on and off. That will damage the cords in the belt. Once you do that, you take your wrench, I usually hold my hand on the belts so that way they stay in the grooves. All right, once you have it loose enough where you can turn it by hand, take your motor, spin it, because sometimes with the belt memory of the belts being shipped, they may have one that's tighter on the top, one that's tighter on the bottom. When you rotate that lets it normalize to where they're all the same tension.
So the tension of those belts is determined by the weight of the motor?
By the weight of the motor. So that way, no matter what, from the beginning of that belt service to the end of that belt service, it has the same tension on that belt drive. There's no question and there's no doubt about you're maintaining the appropriate tension on that unit. And when they do the belt calculation, it's not only for the speed of the blower, it also helps to set that tension to make sure that you minimize slippage on the belt drive.
So you don't go by like a deflection of, touch your belt and you see you have a little bit of deflection in there, like a 1/4 inch maybe?
For doing the tension on the belts, no, you do not have to take a belt tension guide and check the tension on the belts. That has already been calculated, because if you look down here, you have a pivot point where this motor plate raises up and down. Okay. So with that pivot point and the length and the distance between the center of this shaft and the center of that shaft, the length of this belt was calculated to maintain X tension on that belt drive. So that way it's not too much and it's not too little.
Okay, but what's to keep you from lowering it too far down?
You can't.
You can't.
It's always going to be floppy.
It will only go as far as these belts will allow. And for the question I think you're asking as far as with the lifting device, once you have your belts installed, with this black piece just hand tight against this piece right here, you have another jam nut up underneath this piece down here. Now by the book, these are a DN 150 frame size. So that measurement from the bottom of this black piece to the top of that nut should be approximately 45 centimeters, or whatever the SAE conversion would be. Now, rule of thumb, you may not carry a little handy dandy ruler like I have when I'm doing startups, because usually the first time when I close the unit up and I put the belts on, I set it to that interval. So that way when you go back to do the service, all you have to do is break loose that bottom jam nut, and then I have this top jam nut that'll be on top of it. You'll back that off and you'll raise your piece up against this, raise your motor, change your belts. You never have to really do anything but break that bottom one loose. It stays in place once it's set. I'm going to show you another rule of thumb you can use in case that has moved on you. So once you have your belts on, you're ready to lower this down and lock it in place. Now over time, these pieces may get dust and dirt in them, and they may get a little stiff to turn. If it gets too bad, you can take WD-40 and WD-40 only and spray a little bit inside of here, and it will help loosen that back up because it helps wash that dirt out. Now my rule of thumb for 45 centimeters is from this piece here to where the flats end is approximately 1/4 inch. That's about what it works out to be. So if you don't have this ruler on you and that nut down on the bottom is moved, that's the rule of thumb you can use. Because at this point, this thing's only purpose is to, if you were to lose all of those belts, it just prevents that motor plate from just slamming all the way down. So, that on.
That doesn't lock down. It's always going to have tension from the motor weight, right?
This should always move. It should move just like that.
That's what keeps the belt in tension, is the weight.
The weight keeps the tension, yes.
Yeah.
And this, at this point, serves to prevent this motor plate from just slamming down if you were to break belts.
Yeah.
And it also provides, when needed, your ability to lift it up.
Never seen that before.
Aerzen has been using it for, what, I know 15 years. Some of the earlier blowers had the manual tension plates. Others of them had a slightly different design. They may have used a jack to raise it up versus the universal lifting device, but they've always had some way to tension the belts. With this, it alleviates, because if you're doing a manual tension, right now the sheave on the blower and the sheave on the motor, they are perfect. I used a laser alignment tool for belt drives to align those. So axially and horizontally, they are lined up to where they're running true. Whereas if you had where the manual tension bolts, where you have one bolt over here and one over here, you would have to make sure you had that lined up, or you could create belt drive issues.
So there is a way to, if they happen to get out of alignment.
Now there's for doing alignments on the unit, it should be checked once a year. Now, like I said, for me, I have a laser tool called a belt hog for doing belt drive alignments. We do sell those if y'all are interested and you have enough belt drives to be able to justify the cost, because they do run, I think it's $1,600 or $2,600. I can't remember which. But it is a complete kit, and it's not just for one particular size belt drive. But like I said, it is a laser alignment tool for belt drives. It saves you time, and if you follow the instructions, it pretty much guarantees a proper alignment. You can use a straight edge across the face of your two pulleys. That will get you pretty close, usually within a 1/16 or less. That is acceptable. But if you have belt drive issues, you may have to resort to a little bit more accurate method. Now, and I stress that because if it does get out of alignment, two things can happen. You can start getting excess belt wear. You'll start seeing a lot of belt dust on the front of the motor, potentially the front of the blower. It can also cause premature belt failure, and it can also cause sheave wear, because it's pulling against one side or the other. And we have seen in severe issues where it has actually caused the belt to walk off the pulley, because you're pulling on one side and it reaches a point to where when it's sitting in that groove, it walks up on top, and it can either flip over or come completely off. Any other questions about changing the belts, the belt drive, alignment, the cooling fan? No?
So just one.
Yes.
All right, so there's 15 of these belts between this row of machines. How many should we keep in stock?
Right now, you have, is it one or two air filters per blower?
I believe it's one per blower.
Belts.
You have one air filter and one set of belts per blower.
Per blower, okay.
That's what you have in stock right now.
Okay, so
now,
15 replacements for the belts.
plus the ones for the small ones.
Yeah.
Now, the typical rule of thumb that we recommend is when it comes time for service, you buy new sets, and then you use the spares that you've had. You replace the new with put the new in stock. That way you always have your spares. So that way, no matter if we'll say you have a severe spring and you end up needing to change air filters, in between is right here. We're getting ready to cover that. No, they are not cleanable.
Throwaway.
Yes. But yes, that would be what we would recommend for spares, because these don't have oil filters. You don't have to worry about oil filters. Your primary replaceable components are your air filter and your belts and your oil. Any other questions about the belt drives? All right. The next item is the oil change. Over here on this side, you have your spot where you drain the oil. This is the external oil level gauge that I described. Up here is where you would fill or add oil. It's just a screw on top with a plastic container. If I can get it back on. There we go.
What's the volume?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I know a 5-gallon pail and 1-gallon jug is enough to do every blower. I believe these are approximately just under a gallon each, if I remember correctly. I have all of it saved on my laptop, and it is listed in the manual. They give you all the different blower sizes and the quantities of oil that they use. On the ID tag, it gives you your 800 number, your email address, what the air filter part number is, the quantity and part number of belt, and the oil type. So doing your visual check, usually if you're just even walking by, you can glance at this and that'll let you know what your oil level is. I have not adjusted the ones on here that need adjusting yet, so they don't match what's on the stage. All of the stages are set at the dot or touching it one side or the other. But that's where a quick reference. If you have any doubts whether or not this is right, I will show you on the stage where you can find those sight glasses to verify. So to change the oil, you have this cap here, which should only be hand tight. You have your handy dandy drain hose. It has the plastic ring that screws on. This white ring, if it's missing, what it does is it fits inside this valve to fully push it open and seal it so it doesn't leak around this. So to change it, line it up, start it on there, tighten it all the way down, drain the oil into your sample bottle or your catch jug, whichever, if you're taking a sample or changing the oil. Once you're done, take this off. Now, one thing I do recommend is before you connect this up and after, take a rag and just wipe that off and wipe this off. Once you're done, put your cap. There is an O-ring inside this cap that you want to look at when you take it off. Make sure it's not damaged. If it is, you can take it out, match it up to an O-ring, or contact us.
There's a ball valve.
No, this is your valve. This pushes against that valve as you tighten it up.
Oh, okay, I see.
And
I was wondering why no oil came out.
Because this right here, if I push on this, oil is going to come out.
I want that.
Because I have, there was one of these that I actually had to drain a little bit of oil out of.
Yeah.
Yeah, one I had to drain out of, the other one of them I had to add a little bit. And now I can't get the, there we go. And like I said, hand tight. If this valve sticks or fails and does start seeping around this cap, you can tighten it up a little bit, but just really wrenching down on it is not going to help. Just over hand tight is about as tight as you'd ever want to go with it. If that valve does stick, you can change it out without having to, you can change this out without having to drain the oil. But if that starts leaking or fails, you will have to drain the oil out to change that out. Now, one thing I will say is where this piece that it screws into is attached to this tube, do not spin that on that tube. It will cause it to start leaking and you'll have to replace that whole section of tube. So take 2 wrenches, break it loose, take it out. You can try to clean it. If it doesn't stop leaking, then you'll have to replace it. Any questions on draining oil? I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Once you're ready to fill it back up, take your cap off. And now as you're filling it up, once you start getting oil into the sight glass and it starts coming up towards your mark, you will definitely want to slow down, because once you reach that point, it doesn't take much more to finish topping it off. So if you overfill it, guess what? You have to drain some out. So bring it up to, like I described on the circle, you have a fat line for the high, a fat line for the low, and then the thin line in the middle equals the dot on the stage. Now, for your air filter. All right, you have 3 spring catches that hold your cover on. Your air filter it's held in by 2 screws on the back that I'll show you in just a second. They fit into little keyholes You twist it counterclockwise to be able to take it out. You twist it clockwise to hold it in place. Now those screws are only to hold it while you're taking the cover on and off. They do not seal it. Give it a slight twist to take it out, slight twist to lock it. Now if when you put the filter in, if it's too loose, you can tighten these 2 screws up slightly, but it's not going to do a whole lot because they're only glued on the back of the piece. Now your filter, if you've ever seen the polyfill that is in like quilts or blankets, that's basically what this filter media is. So hence why it is not cleanable, because if you saturate it with water, just like polyester, it will shrink. So when you do an inspection, what you're going to notice is the airflow comes in this way and then flows out through the filter. So on the bottom down here, you're going to notice almost the same size as your intake pipe. It's going to be really dark in that one spot. Now, as it goes up toward the top, it will get lighter in color, but if it's really bad, then you'll want to replace it. And on the back of here, it gives you your part number, frame size, and it tells you what's the top and how to put it in and out. So we reach up in here, and like I said, it holds it in place while you're installing and removing the cover, but it doesn't seal it. Once you put the cover on, it pushes it up against the back, and this seal here is what seals it. Now,
You got make a filter that's cleanable?
no. There are external intake housings that would like go up on the roof, or externally if these were inside a building, that do have semi-permanent filters in them. But as far as us manufacturing one, no.
You know what the cost is of one of those filters?
Not off the top of my head. I don't always see prices. A lot of times what I see is just a shipping list or inventory list of a package that just gives me part numbers and quantities. But I will touch on part of that here in a couple minutes. And to my knowledge, there are no aftermarket manufacturers that make these filters. All right, any questions on the air filter housing? Now, when you're doing your inspections of the machine at the 6 month and 1 year point, you're wanting to make sure this bolt inside here is tight. If it gets loose, you're going to know it, because that fan's going to start wobbling. It's going to hit that fan guard, and it's going to start making a lot of noise. Now, if this cover here was to shift and come in contact with the fan, you will be able to identify that as well, because it sounds like a scrubbing noise. So if you hear that, you want to make sure your fan clearance is good. Now, in installing that, once you're done with it, you tilt it out at the bottom and then set it in place. Then you have your 4 screws that hold it in place. Once you have them started, you can move it around to line it up. Any questions on that one? We will head around back. The direction area I was talking about is right here on the front of the unit. All right, back here on the back of the unit, you have your flex connection that connects you up to the valve and your piping going out to the system. You always want to make sure that if this blower can go into automatic operation, that all valving that's not automatic is open. Or if for your aeration, if there's a particular place that you set it at, you want to make sure that it's set. Now, you want to inspect this every time you do an inspection on the machine. You're looking for cracks around here where it connects up. If you see like a dark line, you may have a leak there if you can't hear it. Usually you'll be able to hear a whistling noise if it's leaking. Now, down at the bottom under that, there is a piece of foam that's showing. We do have cover plates that I will be putting in place for that. So if you have to remove this door, you will have to take those cover plates off, take it off. All right, inside here is your control panel. You have your 2 pressure transducers, you have your Ethernet communication, and then you have the control modules that relay those functions through the Ethernet connection to SCADA. This right here is your 24 volt power supply. As you look at the terminal block, you have your incoming control power. There will be a couple more wires connected up here for communication to the VFD, but everything else will go through the Ethernet connection. I mean, this is, you likely will never have to come in here unless there's an issue, but I wanted to give you an overview of what was back here. Now, as you look down inside the blower compartment, as you can see, you have your attached fan on the motor. You have a grounding strap with the base frame to cabinet. You have a grounding strap from cabinet to earth ground. That gives you your protection both ways for the motor, and in case lightning was to hit, it gives it a place to go. It's not a guarantee that it'll protect everything, but it gives you a better chance than if you didn't have it. Now, inside here, if you want to come up and look, there's a brass ring. That is your oil level sight glass that I was referring to on the stage. There's one on all 4 corners. And there are, yeah, the other 2 are on the opposite side against the wall. There is no cover over there. To see those, you climb in. That's what I was saying. You can take your phone, set it on selfie, and you can hold it up. Okay, click, and that'll let you know. But that's typically only if you're leveling it, or you have to level it. If you're just checking the oil level, you can reference that one right there. Because like I said, I have all of these to where they are level. They're in contact with that dot in the center on all 4 corners. And then back here at the back is your pressure relief valve, which actually, to make this a little easier for all of us, you have your pressure relief valve, and right here is your swing check valve. You have these 6 bolts that hold it in place. Like I said, about every 2 years, or if you come outside, we'll say that, I don't know if these 2 blowers in particular have a common header up top, but like those have a common header. If you were to come out a blower that was off, you could hear it turning. Well, you probably want to come shut this and check that, because that means that it's probably getting backflow into it, which is causing it to turn backwards. And do we want them to turn backwards? No. That's a very bad thing. And I mean, that's pretty much the covers everything. This here is to prevent, if that relief valve was to lift, to prevent the hot air from venting inside. It goes down, and where I was talking about that the air came from and vented, this is where it comes out. So as you're walking by a running blower, you will feel air coming out the bottom.
Backwards, you have to literally go in and change the phases, right?
If the motor was turning backwards, yes. But if backflow was doing it, then no. That means that this has failed. Only if you're doing something electrically as I described, i.e. you had a motor fail, you had a drive fail or something like that, or the power, your incoming power, something changed on it, you would want to take your belts off, verify your motor rotation, and then you could, as long as everything was okay, then you could put the belts back on. That's the only time that comes into play. If it's just backflow that's doing it, that's where you want to go.
One reason I asked is that someone had another piece of equipment and someone said, "Oh, this is run backwards." And,
no, all 5 of these have been verified. They are running in the right direction. Initially, they were backwards. We changed it in the motor junction box. They're all turning the correct direction. Now, if you have to level the blowers, now the small ones, they have 3 of these vibration isolation mounts in them. These blowers have 4. So if you were to have to level the blower, there will be some extra shims left over from where I leveled them. If you look down on this side and the front, you can see where I put those in between the base frame and those resilient mounts. That is how you level these blowers. The cabinets are structurally sound, but they're not designed to lift that entire weight of the blower at a single point. They're designed for that entire base to be sitting on the foundation for appropriate support. So for leveling, loosen this bolt, lift the frame up, and adjust as needed. Unless you have an issue with the slab, you'll probably never have to level. Any questions? All right, the last service item that I want to cover is right here on the pressure relief valve. Every one of them have it. There's 2 holes. What that is for is once a year, with the blower running, take 2 flat tip screwdrivers, lift, let it exhaust, release, make sure it reseals. That's for 2 reasons. Number 1, if you had any mice or anything get up in here and make a nest in here, or they get something on top of here, it blows all that out so it doesn't create any blockage. It also lets you know that that pressure relief valve is functioning, and it does reseal if it does lift. Because over time, due to just the heat cycles on them, the springs can, 15, 20 years down the road, it may lift at a PSI less than what the original design was. So that's why you check those, make sure they lift, make sure they reseal. Now, as far as an actual replacement interval, no, there isn't one. This inspection, if it fails or starts lifting early, then it needs replacement. Yes, there's one on the opposite side. It goes right into the spring that's inside of the of there. If that pipe wasn't on there, you could look down in there, you would see the spring, and you'd see the adjustment rod where it was set. And it does give you the information on what the setting is and what the flow rate is. And that's it. I mean, they're simple to maintain. All of your books will be turned over as well. These are your operating manuals. They get everything that I covered is in there as far as the maintenance and repair instructions. It doesn't go in depth on repair wise because as far as disassembly of the stage itself, it needs to go back to our shop, because those gears that you've seen in that picture, they're hydraulically installed and hydraulically removed. If you were to just try to take a puller and pull those off, you would destroy those shafts. Trust me, people have tried, and they ended up having to buy new blowers because of it. So now we do have other authorized repair shops, but if you contact us, then we can relay that information to you if it doesn't come directly back to us. Motor maintenance for these, it's pre-programmed into the service counters. 12,000 hours was the greasing interval that was listed on the data plate, along with the quantity of grease. The type is Mobile Polyrex EM. It's electric motor grease. So I'm sure y'all are probably using on just about every new motor you have out here, because Polyrex or Unirex EM, that's becoming pretty much the standard for electric motors. Anything else?
Does the top come off, or you can slide
It can come off, yes.
around if you ever had to?
There's two options you can do. Yes, you can take the top off. It would require taking this panel here off, which means you have to remove this. When you remove this, you can take it out and set it down here, but you may have to support it partially off the base. The cables may not be long enough to reach all the way to the bottom. Your best bet, if at all possible, if we walk back around to the front, if y'all do have to do a stage replacement or a motor replacement, your best bet is to be able to remove this other panel, this whole front assembly here, and this. That gives you full access to the front, and then you don't even have to take this off. If you have like a small hand-operated small crane that has the weight capacity for both of them, you can go right in, pick it up, back it out, and then put it back in. They did leave you enough room for that, I think. Now, for the average size, for the weight capacity of these, you can probably get it by in between there, but that's the other option that you would have. You could put a monorail over the top where you'd be able to lift either one of them out, set them down here on a pallet jack, move it to the end. That's pretty much your options on how you would access that. And if we come out to assist you with that, we'll still have to have the whatever we're using to lift it to do it. Because that right there is all I bring with me.
You guys will come out to assist on something like that.
If it's under warranty, yes, definitely. But if it's outside of the warranty period, that's up to y'all if y'all want to pay us to come out to do it.
Right.
But we will be more than happy to get it scheduled, come out and assist you in doing that. So that way you make sure that you're maintaining the equipment as designed. I mean, it's not that difficult to do, and that's just like for the service. We do offer service agreements. You can call either this number to get a quote for that. We do it in various incarnations. We can do just a single visit a year. We can do more than that. We can just come out once to assist you going through the service once, so y'all can actually see it done and walk through it with us, or y'all just call us and we do it. So whichever way you would like to do it, we're more than happy to meet those needs. And like I said, on each one of these, they have an ID tag. This information here will apply to that blower. Now, if you do call for a trouble call or to order parts, you have two numbers right here. One is what we call the sales order number, which covers the entire group. And then the next number is the individual package serial number. So either one of those two numbers will get us what we need, but we would like to have this serial number so we make sure if there are parts ordered, we put it on record that that particular machine received those parts. So that way, if we've had one that had we'll say repetitive issues, then we know we have that flagged in the system as that was the case. And there again, like I said, these are really dependable machines, but they are mechanical. And just like with anything, you could get, lemons do exist. Now, knock on wood, thank God, we have been fortunate enough to not have that many.
Two running and one standby. So they'll alternate. Yeah, two duty and one standby.
All right, y'all got anything else for me?
I don't think so.
I mean, I try to be as thorough as I can to give you all the information you need, but not tremendously overload you. And before y'all go, if y'all want to walk back to the car with me, I can give y'all a couple of cards that has my contact information on it. Y'all can put it in the operations room or what have you. So that way.
Give one to Robert for sure, so he has it here on file.